Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this next installment of our WAM series of webinars. My name is Rachel Moiselle, and I am a WAM Project Officer at AHEAD. I will be your host today. Now, like most of you here today, AHEAD staff and the presenters are all working from home, so please bear with us if the webinar is a little rough around the edges. Sometimes internet connections may drop, or you may hear a dog barking in the background. So before we kick off, just some information about the facilities here today. We do have captioning, so thanks to AI Media for that. We have that available for attendees who wish to watch the webinar with subtitles. So you just need to click the CC button on the bottom of your screen rather. So my co-host is the lovely Niamh Grennan, so she will be answering some of your questions via the Q&A feature and sharing links within the chat box. So the Q&A feature, if you have any questions for the presenters, please ask the questions using these features, as it's easier to keep track so we don't miss them. Now the comments or chat with other attendees throughout the session via that feature. And if you are on social media, Twitter specifically, the hashtag is WAMinar, so please do use that if you want to talk about that online. So now for the main event, we have some very exciting speakers for you today. So we have Siobhan Long. She is our keynote speaker. She will be talking about assistive technology. You know, what is assistive technology? She'll be looking at it from a national context, but also the big picture of AT. What are the biggest barriers in relation to AT, and a little bit about AT passports as well. Then we have a WAM graduate who successfully completed 2 WAM placements in the NTMA and ESB and had very positive experiences using assistive technology in both of those places. So she's going to be talking about that and also her journey, her AT journey from education into the workforce. And last but not least, we do have Trevor Roland, who is an AHEAD employee. He's our digital media and e-learning officer, and he will be going through top 10 tips in relation to AT. He'll be talking about some select devices, and he'll be weaving those top 10 tips into a journey, an AT journey of an AT user. So I'd like to start the webinar by asking my colleague Niamh to launch our first poll of the morning. So if you could launch the first poll, just asking people where they're coming from. So you can see, please select the option appropriate to you. I work in HR, I am the designated disability access officer, I am a hiring manager, I am a line manager, I am a regular employee. Our second one is just what sector do you work in? So that's public employer, private employer, higher education, further education, NGO, not-for-profit, or other. So I'll just give you a little moment to fill that in before I end it. Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to end that now. So that's very interesting. We have 25% of people from HR. 15% are designated disability access officers, just 3% are hiring managers, 15% are line managers, and 43% regular employees. So in terms of the sector, 36% of people watching today are from the public sector, 18% from the private sector, 7% just from higher education, 16% from further education, 18% from the NGO not-for-profit sector, and 5% other. So thank you very much for answering all of those. And I have one more poll to ask you guys today, which is probably the most pertinent. It's just, what is your level of awareness of AT before watching this? So Niamh, if you could launch that poll, that would be wonderful. And I'll just give you a quick moment to fill that in. Okay, I'm going to end that now. So this is actually excellent because only 9% are very familiar, so hopefully this will be very useful. 58% are somewhat familiar and 32% are not at all familiar. So I'm very happy to see those results because it means that you're going to get a lot out of this session. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Niamh. So yeah, I just want to talk before I introduce Siobhan, just a little bit around what we do in AHEAD. I'm sure some of you will be aware, but just in case you aren't. AHEAD works to create inclusive environments in education and employment. AHEAD has been around since 1988, and the WAM programme, or WAM for short, is a project of AHEAD that has been around for 15 years now, since 2005. The WAM programme is funded by the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. So WAM works with employers who provide paid graduate level internships or placement for graduates with disabilities by ring fencing roles for a minimum of 6 months. And what's wonderful is we're seeing people move away from that traditional model and providing longer placements of 1 year, 2 years, and even 3 years. So to date, we've placed over 470 graduates, and 80% of our graduates secure full-time work as a direct result of their placement upon completion. So that's a statistic we're very proud of. We really see a WAM placement as the first rung on the employment ladder that facilitates so many other opportunities, and that statistic reflects that. So you can find out more information and lots of resources on our website, so www.ahead.ie/WAM. So thank you very much for that. So for listening to that. So what I'm going to do now is ask our first speaker, Siobhan Long, who is the National Manager, Assistive Technology Training and CTech Services at Enable Ireland, to share her mic, share her camera and her screen, and I'm just going to mute myself so that you can listen to her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rachel. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank AHEAD for the opportunity to be part of what I hope will be a very useful webinar. It's really interesting to hear your statistics there in terms of the internship program. 80% full-time work post-internship is a really impressive stat, particularly in the context of, I suppose, supporting people with disabilities to get into employment in Ireland. So kudos to all of you in AHEAD for that. I'd just like to share my presentation now. So I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry, my presentation appears to have disappeared, but hopefully it'll. Okay, so can I just check, Rachel, that you're seeing the presentation?
That's all perfect. Thank you very much, Siobhan.
Great, thank you. Okay, so as I said, it's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Siobhan Long, and my role is that I manage Enable Ireland's National Assistive Technology Training Service and our CTech services. So today I wanted to share with you, I suppose, some thoughts around assistive technology and employment, an untapped resource, because I really do believe that assistive technology in Ireland certainly is untapped in the context of employment. Very briefly, my own background, I've been working in Enable Ireland in this role since 2001 when we established this service. It was a new service back then. We have been running a Foundations in Assistive Technology course accredited by TU Dublin since that year. And we've been, this year of course, with COVID, it's gone completely online. It previously would have been about 70 to 80% online. Now it's a fully online course. And we just finished it very recently and had some really wonderful contributions from people. We also have our own e-learning site, enableireland.at.ie, and my contact details are there. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any further, more in-depth queries after today's session. So what I'd like to do briefly is to talk a little bit about just Enable Ireland, who we are, then look at AT in employment in Ireland, look at what's involved in supporting somebody around assistive technology, and that would be around the assessment process and the models of assessment that are out there. I'd like to propose a new model for Ireland and beyond, something that I think has resonance and application internationally, and that's fundamentally based on the concept of an AT passport. And we've been doing a lot of research in recent years in partnership with the Disability Federation of Ireland, with Maynooth University's All Institute and with Microsoft on evolving this concept of the AT passport, and hopefully have some time for questions and discussion as well. So just really briefly, Enable Ireland, we're a disability service provider. We support over 5,000 people with multiple disabilities across Ireland in those locations, not unfortunately in every county. The majority of the people using our services are children, but the Assistive Technology service would have more than, I would say, a 60-40 balance of provision of support to adults. We provide more support to adults than to children. We have about 25 or more local centres now, and we work in partnership with the HSE and other disability service providers, as well as in partnership with the corporate sector, particularly Microsoft. And we'd like to think that we're a leading provider of assistive technology services, of training and supports nationally. But I say that in the context of a very fragmented service in Ireland. So I'll come back to that again. So what is assistive technology? It was interesting to see that, you know, that 58% of you said you're somewhat familiar, and 32% of you were saying in the poll earlier that you're not at all familiar. So I hope that this will give you some foundation stones for further learning. So if we just look at what the international definitions tell us about assistive technology, I suppose the most established definition is this one, which states that that assistive technology is any item or piece of equipment or a product system, whether you buy it commercially off the shelf, whether it's modified or customized, that is used to increase, maintain or improve functional capabilities of an individual with a disability. Now that definition is all well and good, but really just focuses on the technology itself. And it doesn't consider the much wider ecosystem within which anybody who needs to use assistive technology lives, works and exists. So the second definition is the one that's been promoted by the WHO through their GATE initiative. And the GATE initiative stands for Global Cooperation in AT. It's been in operation now for about 5 years, and they've been doing some really valuable work. So they define assistive technology as an umbrella term covering the systems and services relating to the delivery of assistive products and services. So they're very much taking a holistic view, and they recognize that, you know, it's not about the technology itself, it's actually about the assessment, the training, the access to information, the funding, the procurement, etc. It's that much bigger picture. And in Ireland, we certainly are a long way away from having cohesive systems in place to support people who want to use assistive technology. So I'd like you now to go to menti.com, and I just really want to get a sense from yourselves as to what you think assistive technology means to you. And I'm just going to go to that website myself. So hopefully, all going well, yeah, we'll start to populate a word cloud here. So helpful is the first term or the first concept that comes to mind. Yes, that hopefully, if it's working, assistive technology is a help and not a hindrance, that it aids abilities, that it's about accessibility, absolutely. Any other thoughts? This is totally open to yourself, totally personal. There's no right or wrong answer here. Ease, right? The right assistive technology in the right place at the right time provides ease, absolutely. That it's inclusive and supportive and empowering, yes, absolutely. And support, another coming in there again. And that it optimizes people's abilities, that's so true. That it's user-centric, lovely, really nice. That it's productive, that it should ensure and support people to be productive, and that it's about equity and choice. Absolutely. And that it should level the playing field. Wonderful. And that it's about building skills and aiding abilities. That's really nice, actually. Absolutely. Okay, I think that's fine. That just gives us a broad, I suppose, bird's eye view of what assistive technology means to each of you. And the truth is, it means all of those things. Promoting equality and equity and inclusion. And really, I think you're all speaking to the central point that assistive technology is a tool. It's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And that's a really important facet, I think, of assistive technology. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. Thank you all for contributing to that. And just to really, I'm not going to get into the specifics of individual technologies. Trevor Roland later will be demonstrating some technologies. I just want to give you a flavor here of the examples of assistive technology that are very commonly used in employment. So they would include use of touch screens, use of screen magnification, use of speech recognition software, alternative keyboards and mice. Despite the proliferation of touch screens, alternative keyboards and mice are still really, really important. Literacy support software. I know Trevor is going to talk about this later, but there's a whole range of different assistive technologies in use. And I would have to say that really, one of you mentioned the word accessible when you think of assistive technologies. I think now what we're really talking about are accessible and assistive technologies, because accessibility is built in so much to mainstream technologies these days that often people find that they can use the solutions that are free and built into the operating system, and that they may not have to have recourse to specialist assistive technology solutions. So it's a sliding scale, and that sliding scale is tipping more and more frequently in the direction of accessibility, which is really good news for all of us. Just want to also mention assistive technology assessment, because in the context of Ireland, where we don't have a coherent system in place that supports anybody who might need AT, it's no harm to have a broad understanding of what an AT assessment might look like. So if I'm somebody who needs assistive technology, is there a possibility for me, first of all, to get access to information? When I get that information, is it possible for me to make my own judgment call on what the technology is that will suit my needs? And self-assessment is a very credible and I suppose acceptable first step towards acquiring the AT that anybody might need. And it might be only after that that a formal AT assessment through a service provider might be necessary. And that won't be necessary for everybody who needs AT. But where it is necessary, and we would provide this assessment through our service, and we also support, our AT service supports all of our local centres to assess locally as well. I think the key components that we need to bear in mind are that the assessment is all about identifying what the individual's goals are. They're not about, you know, box ticking exercise or, you know, providing the assessor with some kind of confidence that they've undertaken an assessment. The assessment is only as good as its match with the individual's goals. It's really important that that the assessment ensures that there's an understanding of what the person's experience has been to date, and that there's an understanding of the environment in which that person is working or about to commence work or perhaps return to work. So they're the broad, I suppose that's the big picture. There are various assessment models available internationally, and the two that I've picked to reference today in the context of employment are Marcia Shearer's Matching Person and Technology model, which is a very, very well-established model, very complex, takes a very, very cohesive view of the person at the center of the process, and identifying the most appropriate assistive technology to meet their needs based on what they need to be able to do, what the environment is that they work in, what their past experience has been, how comfortable they are, even the aesthetics of the technology. I think more and more aesthetics are incredibly important. And none of us want to be saddled with technology that's unattractive or simply labels us as different. We want it to blend in with the environment in which we work. And she considers, Marcia Shearer considers matters of cultural, attitudinal, economic and physical importance as well. So that's just one, and I've included hyperlinks here to that model. And the second model is the Human Activity Assistive Technology, or HAT model. And that model, again, is very similar in that it looks, first of all, at the individual, then it looks at the activity the person wants to be able to undertake, then it looks at the assistive technology, but all three are looked at within the context in which that assistive technology is being used. In terms of the assessment process, I just thought it was useful to maybe demystify it. It's not a cold clinical process by any means. It's all about being prepared, having a conversation together to see what the particular challenges are that the person wants to address, having opportunities to observe how the person is currently getting on, for example, if they're already using technology, experimenting and trialing different solutions that might work, making recommendations, and crucially, writing a report that summarizes that experience. Now, you might think that from the way I've listed those things out, that that's a very clean process that takes about 2 hours, but it isn't, because, you know, any of those steps may require additional input from other people, or it might simply require time. So the opportunity during the experimentation phase, for example, for the person to take a piece of technology, take it home or take it into the workplace and trial it over a period of days, hours, days or weeks, to see whether it suits their needs. And often that's an iterative process where it goes back on itself. Piece of equipment is trialed, it may not be found to be suitable, and therefore another piece of equipment or another set of strategies are introduced. So it's kind of as I said, an iterative or almost like a circular process, as the individual and the AT assessor work together to find the best solution, and then document that solution in a report. The key principles that I think apply to assistive technology assessment processes are that they're, first of all, they're always user-led. Just because we meet somebody who perhaps presents with challenges that we think mirror somebody who came in yesterday does not mean that the same solutions are likely to apply. Everybody is so individual. The contexts in which they work are different. So it's really important that each session is very much led by the user, that there is a matching of the user needs to technology and not the other way around. So the technology should not be driving the assessment. For the assessor, I think it's really crucial to discard preconceptions and not make any assumptions beforehand, to enable the participant to experiment and to compare options, to discuss openly what seems to be working, what may be problematic, and to document clearly and concisely. So they're just the nuts and bolts really of the process. In Enable Ireland, we have a workplace assessment service which we provide as a private paid service to employers. It's not a particularly large part of our service, simply because the resources that we have are not extensive. But I just wanted to share with you a review that we undertook this year of 13 participants who have partaken of our workplace assessment service. In general, we would receive referrals from employers on behalf of employees to come to the workplace and undertake an AT assessment with the employee. 77% of the people that we saw were female and 29% male. We don't really know why that is, but that's the balance from this very small sample. 61% were from the private sector, and that meant that 6 out of 10 were eligible for the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant. I'll come back to that later. All needed advice on PC access. So the workplace assessment service was very much, I suppose, accessed by people who are working in an office type role, or certainly in a role where using laptops and desktop devices was central to the role. 61% also needed additional ergonomic advice, which we were able to provide to them. I think the key point I wanted to share with you was that the cost of the AT solutions for these people ranged from 300 to the most expensive, which was 1,800, with an average cost of just over €1,000. And I think that's really a key point, because there can often be a misconception that assistive technology is really expensive. And in our experience, it isn't, in fact. And if you take the final point there, that all of the participants, all of them had a minimum of at least 15 years left prior to retirement age. So if you look at accommodating somebody at an average cost of €1,000, you can see that that represents a very tiny financial commitment to somebody to enable them to achieve their best in their career and in their role. So I'll come back to the cost piece again later, but I think that's useful. It's quite difficult. In Ireland, we don't have a lot of dedicated AT assessment services to call on for employers and employees. That said, there are some wonderful people working out there in employment who have trained themselves up perhaps from a HR role or in an IT role, and are actually providing an incredible resource in the workplace. I just wanted to mention COVID, AT in a time of COVID. What we're seeing right now is that, as Rachel mentioned at the beginning, we're all working from home today. So remote working has become a very accepted norm within a really, really short period of time. Many of us are using online services with built-in accessibility, such as closed captions, focusing on the main speaker, and so on. And working in these types of settings brings plenty of challenges, no question about it, but it also brings a certain level of flexibility in terms of not having to commute, for example, not losing time in commuting, not having to consider public transport accessibility, and saving on the hours and indeed on the energy that's expended in those elements of work. So I think certainly I've seen it from organisations, disabled people's organisations like the Independent Living Movement of Ireland. They've been really, really strong in advocating for the fact that people with disabilities have been looking for opportunities to work from home where it suited them for many years, and were often denied them. And here we all are now working from home. And if our employers can accommodate us, then there's no reason why they can't accommodate people for other reasons other than a global pandemic, long beyond the period in which COVID-19 will be with us. So I think that's just food for thought in the broader scheme of things. In terms of supports that are available in Ireland, there are a number of supports, limited. I think really we need so much more, but there is the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant, which is a grant available through the Department of Social Protection only to the private sector. And it is valued up to a maximum of €6,350. And as you saw, if the average, even of a small sample, cost of AT accommodations is just around €1,000, that's way, way below the threshold of 6,350. So that's good news. So that grant is there. It is woefully under promoted and under accessed. And in our experience, many employers are not aware of its existence, nor are employees. There's also the Employability Service, which is an employment support service provided by the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection, and that's available throughout the country. Again, there are hyperlinks for all of these in the slide. The Employer Disability Information Service, unfortunately, that service was closed officially in January, I think, of this year, and subsumed within the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. But their website is actually really, really good and has a lot of really valuable information and guides. So I would urge you, if you're new to this area, to visit that site for more information. And of course, AHEAD have produced a richness of resources through their WAM program, and all of those guides that they've produced and toolkits all serve to support this topic of assistive technology in the workplace. The truth is, though, that AT in Ireland, it's fragmented, it's inconsistent, it's very difficult to navigate, it's very opaque, and it's not at all person-centered. So, you know, I would frequently, and our service would frequently take calls from people who just don't know where to start, either in terms of identifying their own needs or supporting a family member or supporting somebody that they work with. So we have a long way to go in Ireland. And so with that in mind, we've been doing quite a bit of work in trying to figure out a model that might work for Ireland. And what we have learned through our research is that we need to undertake a massive systems change program in Ireland if we want a meaningful national assistive technology ecosystem to develop. There's a lot more thinking now around systems theory, and systems theory is really all about ensuring that we look at the big picture and not just at one tiny component of a particular problem if we want to solve it. And that when we make a decision in one component, one aspect of a particular problem, it's going to have knock-on domino effects on other aspects. So if, for example, the Department of Social Protection provides a funding support, they also need to consider how they promote that, how they educate and inform those who are eligible for that funding as to how to get it, because currently that is not the case. Equally, if assessment services are going to be available in pockets of Ireland, such as in the disability sector in Enable Ireland, what are we doing about making them available to people who don't use disability services, but whose needs are every bit as pressing? So systems change is what we're really advocating. And that's, I suppose, documented in this discussion paper, which we published. It's 4 years old now. And in fact, we're currently working on a new edition of this discussion paper titled Assistive Technology for People with Disabilities and Older People. And there's a graphic of the cover of the discussion paper. And there's also a link, a web link to the paper. For anyone who would like to look at it more closely. A couple of key findings from the research that we undertook was that we undertook an online survey of AT users, and what we found was that for 22% of the AT users who responded, their technology cost them less than €200. And for another 42%, it cost between 200 and 1,000 euros. So a massive 64% of people said that their technologies cost less than 1,000 euros, with a further 22% reporting that it costed between 1,000 and 3,800 euros. So, you know, this is again demystifying and blasting that myth that assistive technology is expensive. Certainly there are some examples of technology that are expensive, and 14% of people said that their assistive technology costs more than 3,800. But by and large, the majority of people are using technologies which are far more affordable. In fact, we're embarking on a new survey. We will be over the coming weeks to refresh this information, and my expectation is that we'll find that in fact even a higher proportion of people are using technology which costs less than 200 and less than 1,000 euros. So what do we think if we look at the current situation in Ireland? We believe that in order to create a functioning system, we need to create what we've started to call an AT ecosystem in Ireland. And the reason for that is outlined here. First of all, 13.5% of people have a disability in Ireland. That's 650,000 people. That's a huge proportion, and we need to be supporting people who fall into that group, self-declared through the census. We also know that there are 1 billion people globally, 15% of the world population, who have a disability. And we know that 10% of those who need access to AT have access globally. And I would say that that is probably a fair, in fact, might be even an optimistic measure of the percentage of people who have access here in Ireland who need it. We also know that there's a 78% unemployment rate in Ireland among people with disabilities. So there's a huge need there to support people, and assistive technology is one of the tools that undoubtedly should be made available to support people to access employment. And we feel that it's really essential to embed that across the workforce. And for us, through the research that we've done, we believe that an assistive technology passport is the foundation stone of this AT ecosystem. Now, on my slide, I have a graphic which talks also about what we call a central coordinating agency for assistive technology in Ireland. I suppose that's the brain of the AT ecosystem, with the other components being provision of information, training, provision of service, promoting innovation, providing funding, and ensuring effective procurement. So these are the building blocks of an effective AT ecosystem. And we're currently working on the AT passport at the moment, very strongly in collaboration with Microsoft and with the All Institute in Maynooth, to really see how this, what we believe to be probably an app, an electronic record of a person's referral and eligibility, the selection of AT that they require, the authorization for that assistive technology, the implementation plan, and the management and follow-up. And we believe that with advances in areas such as artificial intelligence, that we've we've got great potential here to ensure that not only does a person carry a record of what their AT needs are, but as they transition from different stages in their lives across different stages, let's say from education into employment, that they bring that passport with them and that it smooths the path and enables them to also transition any working AT from one context to the other, and also that it should remove the need for reassessment when in fact reassessment is not required. It's simply up-to-date information on what the person is using and what the person needs in the new context. And I'd just like to place that in a global context also, that the GATE Foundation, which I mentioned to you, the Global Assistive Technology Initiative from the World Health Organization, they're really interested in this work. They've endorsed it and supported it. And we're very much working to their model, which is what they call a 5 Ps model. The person is at the center, then they have access to the personnel, the products they need, the service provision that's required, and then the policy there is there to back up all of that, and that is underpinned by the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So that's a real whistle-stop tour. What I'd like to do now is just to ask you at this point, although you haven't had much time to reflect, what is the most important point that you need to consider in your particular context when it comes to AT and employment? And if you can go back to menti.com and just, you can just type in what you think is most important for you, because you're coming from different roles. Some of you are employees, some of you work as hiring managers, some of you are working in HR. What for you is the most important thing to keep in mind? System integration, yes, absolutely. One piece of the puzzle will not work in isolation. Removing stigma, very interesting, and I haven't really touched on that other than talking about aesthetics, but yes, I think more and more with mainstream technologies, stigma is being removed. Awareness of AT and its benefits, disability disclosure policies, absolutely, really good to have those in place. Ensuring that the technology matches the employer's needs and assists them. Thank you, really good. That accessibility is at the heart and at the core of assistive technology decision making. Looking at what technology is already freely available and promoting it. Yes, thank you for that, actually. I really haven't touched on that, and I suspect that Trevor will come back to that. Ensuring it's person-centered, ensuring it's providing support, and allowing for all learners to fulfill their education journey, and then I would add, their employment journey, and that employees' individual needs are met. Absolutely. That's just a really brief snapshot, but it's a very helpful one for me, actually, and I'll save that and keep that. So thank you very much. With that, I'd just like to say I'm really delighted to be here, and very happy to take the questions, whether that's now or at the end, whichever you feel is most appropriate, Niamh and Rachel. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point.
Wow, Siobhan, thank you so much. That was extremely educational for myself included. I personally loved your section on assessments. Of course, we in the WAM team conduct needs assessment with each of our graduates before they're placed into the workplaces of our partners. So some of the points that you made there were just wonderful. That point about, assessment is only as good as the achievement of the individual's goals. It's just wonderful. And I really thought the holistic approach, it's not just about the technology, it's the assessment, it's the training piece. So it was all wonderful. Thank you so much. We do have some really interesting questions here. So we actually have 4. I will just ask you. I'm sorry, I didn't share my video there. Sorry everyone who was just listening to my voice, but we do have 4 very interesting questions. So from an anonymous attendee, they've asked, what happens when technology user desires comes up against a business not comfortable with the choice, or perhaps incompatible with business internal software applications? Any advice for finding solutions? And I think that's interesting because we've experienced that, some software has been banned in some workplaces that we work with, such as Grammarly. So do you have any advice on finding solutions when that problem arises?
Sure. It's a great question, and there's never one size fits all answer. But what I would say is, engaging the HR department in the process is really important. Looking at where there might be incompatibility issues. It may be that actually there is a need for redesign to ensure that some of the recommended technology can interface with the technology that's already being used. And if it doesn't, if there is a conflict as you've described there, then I think it's back to the drawing board with the employee and with the assessor to see what other solutions exist that might actually fit. And I think key to that is to really drill into what that incompatibility is about. Is it around problems with data security? Is it around problems with the IT infrastructure? The way it's built within the company? Is it something more to do with the person's access, for example, or use of that technology outside from a remote setting at home? So really, there is never just one solution to a problem. There is usually a lot more than that. So being open to what those other possibilities might be is important for all parties. But I think what's key to resolving those issues is naming honestly where the block is, because sometimes what are articulated as blocks in technology are actually blocks in attitude. So it's really about being honest and open and figuring it out together.
Well, thank you for that. And that's very interesting that you brought up that attitude, because something I saw in the chat box feature actually from Caroline Walsh, she said often students that request AT are viewed by some as a burden, both on the teacher and the institution. And I think, that sometimes translates to the workplace as well. So you talked about that systems change, but the attitudinal change, how do we go about that?
Yes, absolutely. And, principles of universal design for learning, for example, which I think might have still felt very theoretical to a lot of people, have suddenly become very real because of the fact that we are all working remotely. And guess what? This is something we all need to be thinking about. It's not just something for outliers within a workplace or indeed within an educational setting. These are considerations that would benefit everybody. So I think the attitudinal piece is really important. And if there's buy-in within a workplace or within a university or a further education setting from the top, I think then you begin to really see systemic change. But if you're working in isolation, perhaps as an access officer or as an AT advisor in some role, if you're working in isolation, really hard to affect change that's systemic. So it's really about trying to percolate this right through an organization, so that there's ownership there and there's a genuine commitment to resolving and addressing issues. And as you rightly say, that Caroline, I think it was, perceiving somebody who requires assistive technology as a burden, there's your starting block. That's where, fundamentally that problem needs to be addressed attitudinally before the technology is even looked at.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And somewhat related, I'll just ask you one final question, but don't worry, to everyone else who has asked questions, I will try and address them at the end if we have time. So Aoife Murphy asks, in your experience, how often do preconceptions cause issues in assessments, the implementation of solutions, and do you have advice on how to be mindful of it? So that is related to that, attitude that we're trying to shift.
Yeah, I think it's often, you've got the subconscious bias going on there as well. So there are different types of, the preconception can be around expectations of an individual based on something that you read in a referral form. They can also be based on just a label, a diagnosis that somebody has been given, and that is then used to somehow replicate a solution. Take the same off-the-shelf solution that was presented to somebody that worked successfully yesterday or last week. So I think it's about trying to check ourselves, honestly, trying to, before we begin the process of meeting with somebody or having a conversation or an assessment, actually really checking in with ourselves, trying to clear enough headspace that we're not looking for the quickest and the dirtiest assistive technology solution, but that we're actually really open to viewing this as an encounter that's in and of itself. But I think some, other work around subconscious bias is very helpful in this regard. Without getting into it now, I think it's really worth exploring that further. No simple answers, unfortunately.
Oh, certainly, and actually our previous webinar was on unconscious bias, and that is available on our website for anyone who would like to go back and watch it. We had some wonderful speakers there. All of this is very much interconnected. So thank you so much again, Siobhan. There was just great feedback. Mary Stokes, thank you very much, Siobhan, for this great presentation. She specifically loved your point about it being user-led, and I know she had to leave early and she said she had to tear herself away. So thank you very much. I think she speaks for all of us. That was just wonderful. So I'm going to ask you to stop your video now and mute your mic if you would. And I'm going to ask our next speaker, Anya Lennon. Anya Lennon is one of our very successful WAM graduates who completed not one but two successful placements. And she is an AT user, and she's going to talk about her experience now. So Anya, if you wouldn't mind sharing your video and unmuting your mic, that would be wonderful.
Hello everyone, sorry just for the slight delay there, as Rachel mentioned, my name is Anya Lennon. I am visually impaired. I was born severely short-sighted in both eyes, but in recent years I've had numerous complications across both eyes, which has unfortunately left me with only 5 to 10% vision, peripheral vision in my right eye. And I suppose, therefore, I've used assistive technology in both mainstream primary and secondary school, through third level college, and in the workplace. I suppose in relation to acquiring the assistive technology, first of all, actually, just to say that I recently completed 2 of HEAD's WAM placements. The first with the National Treasury Management Agency, and the second with the Electricity Supply Board, or for short, the ESB. And these were 6-month placements. So in both organisations, in relation to acquiring the assistive technology, the process was very similar, in that the WAM team, they basically carried out a needs assessment with me, and then organised with both employers to put the supports in place in the workplace in order for me to perform to the best of my ability in my role. And I suppose just to mention really that my experience then of acquiring the technology, I received the technology in which I requested. And just to give you a little bit of a brief outline of the technologies in which I mainly use in both organisations. So I mainly used Magnifier, which is a screen magnifier app, which can be found on most desktop computers or laptops today. So it basically enlarges the screen's content, which enables me to read words and images on screen. And also then I used CCTV, or what's otherwise known as a desktop video magnifier. And this is a large piece of equipment, which it incorporates basically an electronic magnifier with speech. And this enables me to read and write and have documents read aloud to me. And then finally, an iPhone was the other piece of technology in which I use, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the iPhone being a smartphone made by Apple, and it's the camera in which I use as a portable magnifier as such, so it enables me to carry out office environment tasks such as even say reading a document on the go, or to operate maybe a piece of office equipment such as a photocopier, as it enlarges the labels on a machine, or maybe a touchscreen screen. And I suppose just to mention too that, look, there were many other technologies available to me in both organizations too, which I could use, but I felt just most comfortable using these technologies. For example, we say there was the likes of Fusion, speech and magnification software. There was also a widescreen monitor, and a Dolphin software package as well. There was numerous different technologies that were also available to me, which was just fantastic, for backup. And I suppose then this just brings me on to saying that I absolutely had an extremely positive experience in both organizations. And particularly, I feel the main reasons behind this was because it was down to good communication, teamwork, and strong willingness to learn by all involved. And I think that's the key part. So just to break that down a little bit, say in relation to good communication, I think the needs assessment piece is vitally important, or at least it was vitally important to me, in that, you know, I requested the specific technologies that I felt I would need, with input from the employers as well. And by doing this, it eliminates the purchase of unnecessary equipment, which I think is just fantastic. And I suppose you get a better sense of what your role is and what, you know, obviously what technology is required. And also then in relation to good communication, regular check-ins. So that's coming from my behalf and say line managers, mentors. It's just that I check in with them and, you know, inform them if there was an issue, technical issue as such, or if there maybe I felt that there was equipment, maybe a better piece of equipment than what I may need, or just literally just letting them know that everything's fine either, you know. And also the same from the line manager or mentor, just to check in and say, look, how are you getting on? And through conversations, incredible, just, you know, what can come up in that conversation. And it's just about building a good relationship, and, you know, overcoming issues together, or let it be just that everything is working fine either. So that is very important, and also having a good, I think, connection with IT services in an organization, and possibly maybe to have, you know, a team aware that I was there and using assistive technology, so that they're aware of how it maybe works against other systems that are on the entire organization system. I felt that was really important as well, and it worked incredibly well. So that's the communication piece. I probably could go on forever in relation to that. But the also strong willingness to learn. You know, this again from my behalf to, you know, keep updated about, you know, technology is constantly evolving. So, you know, to keep in touch outside of the organization, read up on even the technology that you're using. There could be another function on that piece of technology you might know about that could help you out in doing a different task in the office. And also then the bit I absolutely loved and saw really done so well in both organizations was the, you know, the access officer, line managers and other colleagues in the office, mentors, that they really just embraced assistive technology, and, you know, even that they'd come over to my desk, were interested in how the assistive technology worked, and even through work, they would actually use possibly the magnification on screen. And even though for a fully sighted person, it can drive someone crazy, really, because, you know, the mouse is going everywhere, but that you just embraced it. And again, it's just a pure two-way learning process. And I think, you know, when an organization can just create that environment, I think it's just fantastic. And again, then it's through conversation that, you know, again, an access officer can maybe tell me about another piece of, you know, equipment that they've seen another person use because they've seen maybe a good few people come through their organization. So as I said, it's just a pure learning process for all. And again, then the teamwork, good teamwork, I think is very important too. And I'm just going to give one example of this. When I carried out my needs assessment, first of all in the NTMA, you know, I felt that the CCTV, the desktop video magnifier, would be of benefit to me in the organisation, and therefore recommended Sight and Sound Technology Ireland, that to, you know, provide me with that piece of technology because I felt that they would have it. So by doing this, the NTMA basically provided me with that piece of equipment. They went to Sight and Sound Technology, and this was provided to me in the office. And then when I used that piece of equipment there, and when I actually moved on into the ESB, and the ESB were aware that I used this with the NTMA, they got, you know, together and with, you know, head support as well, and arranged to get that transported to the ESB's office as well, which I just felt like it was a real success story in relation to teamwork. You know, all organisations working together. So again, with a head, the NTMA, the ESB, and myself, and it's just, you know, brilliant success story there in relation to teamwork. And again, just Sight and Sound Technology, Stuart Lawler and his team there were just played a brilliant role in all of that as well, because they're just incredibly supportive people. And then that brings me really on to just my experience then at third level in relation to acquiring assistive technology and using assistive technology there. And really, this I will leave quite brief because I had a very similar experience to that of in employment. Again, it was a very positive experience. The only difference really was that I had to carry my assistive technology from room to room, lecture hall to lecture hall, and I suppose arrange that my assistive technology would be in place for exams. But sure, that to me, like, that's perfectly grand, but that was just the only difference. And like, again, a needs assessment was carried out there. And you know, it was brilliant because, again, my assistive technology was put in place within the first week of starting college. And, you know, again, it's through having a strong, like, I built up a fantastic relationship with the Access Office. I went to college in the Institute of Technology, Carlow, and I just could not talk highly enough about the staff there. They were absolutely fantastic. And again, it was just about, you know, I built up a great relationship with them, and, you know, kept them informed and updated on what it was that I needed and whatnot. So, as I said, a very, very positive experience. And really then that's just bringing me on to my final message. And that is to say that, like, assistive technology has not only helped me through my school days, college days, and at work, but it just plays an absolute vital role in my everyday life. And therefore, like, I would just like to encourage employers to incorporate assistive technology into their workplace, not only to benefit individuals like me with disabilities, but in order to have a competitive advantage by, you know, being able to hire the right, you know, the best and most talented person for a job, and then also to be able to retain the skills, talent, and experience of employees who may acquire or develop disabilities over time, and by providing something in which is beneficial to all individuals and society as a whole. And really, that is me and my presentation. And I just want to say to all of you who are tuning in today, thanks so much for tuning in and listening. And now I will pass you back over to Rachel. Thanks a million, everyone.
Anya, thank you so much for that. It's great to get that personal experience. There were just floods of positive comments coming in and quite a few questions as well. I think, you know, your point about good communication, teamwork, and that strong willingness to learn is just so important. And I really love that final point, the business case for AT, you know, getting that competitive advantage both by hiring the best and most talented people for the job and in terms of employee retention as well. I just thought that was a fantastic point. Just in terms of specific positive comments coming in, Bernie O'Connor and Niall O'Hanlon from the ESB said it was great to see you. Niall said, really enjoyed having Anya on board here in ESB, which was a positive experience both for her and the HR team. And he says, just to give some idea of the cooperation between employers, the AT technology used by Anya at the NTMA was lent to ESB, which also helped in the settling in period for Anya. And thank you very much to the NTMA. So it's great to have that cross collaboration piece between organisations in relation to AT. So in terms of actual questions, so we have Irene Brune here, Anya, if you would unmute yourself. She asks, did you have any negative experience with other students or employees being biased? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Hello, Irene. To be honest, I have not had a negative experience in relation to that side. Sorry, Rachel, can you just repeat the question?
Of course, and you can share your camera as well, if you wouldn't mind. But Irene just asks, did you have any negative experience with other students or employees being biased? And if so, how did you deal with that?
No, I can genuinely say I have never really had that problem. I really haven't. It's been genuinely a positive experience. I've actually felt the other way, that people were more interested in actually learning more about you know, the assistive technology, and kind of sometimes at times having a bit of a crack about it, you know, having a bit of a good sense of humor around it, and people wanting to kind of, you know, even my CCTV every now and again could start, you know, talking out of turn in the office, and, you know, like, just basically, you know, people got on with it, and the same as myself, like I just should have a bit of a crack about it, and I've never had a negative response like that. No, definitely not.
Well, that's just wonderful to hear. And we did get another comment / question in the Q&A box. Anya's attitude is so positive, and it's great that you had the support from the employer. They say there seems to be a fear within organizations, businesses, not sure if it is due to lack of knowledge or fear of inconvenience and cost. And they say that just you know, it's very uplifting to hear your story, and you're an inspiration. So can you speak to that? Do you think that that is true, that fear?
So fear in relation to, sorry, Rachel, in relation to?
Just lack of awareness on.
I suppose I've been lucky in that regard that I didn't see that myself. I saw it more so on the other side, that, you know, I felt that both organisations that I carried out my WAM placement, that everything was, you know, that people couldn't possibly try to embrace it enough, and yeah, like I genuinely felt I had a very positive experience, and I didn't see that fear element. You know, I think sometimes the fear element can, like, I know for myself, I can nearly fear the elements of maybe actually having to state maybe the technologies, that the assistive technologies that I actually need myself more so in the initial stages, because I'm always wondering, well, you know, what maybe exactly and specifically what type of assistive technology I would actually need, and I never really want to add too much cost onto an employer or anything like that. So I think the fear I find more so comes from my own self. I haven't really witnessed fear from the employer side. So yeah.
Well, it's great that you haven't experienced that, but certainly you should feel that yourself. You're perfectly entitled to assistive technology. You know, employers are required to provide that by law. So thank you very much again. It was just wonderful to have you. I know all of us in WAM really appreciate you coming on and talking about your experience. And just to end there on a couple of positive comments, but there are just so many. Magella Callahan says, thanks Anya, great to hear your experience, very inspirational. Another, thank you so much for sharing your experience, really good advice. And that is really reflective of so many more comments that I don't have the time to read out. So thank you so much, Anya.
Can I just say thanks so much to everyone there, and just to look at, just to say to everyone, just if you can just embrace assistive technology, it can be beneficial to everybody, and to everybody watching, just, you know, it's just fantastic. It's changed my life. It's you know, it's just amazing, really. It's brilliant. So if anybody ever wanted to just contact me or anything, or ask me any further questions, I'd be more than delighted, because, as I said, I went through school days and through, you know, other workplaces as well and all that. So I mean, I'm after seeing quite a lot, and technology has evolved so much over the years, and I just think, as I said, it's just allowed me to reach my potential and, you know, perform to the best of my ability. So I can't talk highly enough about it. And thanks to all my employers and to the college in which I went to as well. They've been absolutely fantastic. So that's all.
Thank you very much, Anya. Thank you again. So I'll ask you to mute yourself and stop your video. And then last but very much not least is Trevor Roland, our very own digital media and e-learning officer. So if you would like to just start your presentation, and we will be finished before 1 o'clock. So Trevor, we're very excited to see your presentation.
Great. Thanks very much, Rachel. Well, first of all, I have to say a big thanks to Siobhan and Anya. Their presentations were amazing, and it was great to get to all those different insights about assistive technology from a service provider and an AT user. So a little bit about myself. So as Rachel said, my name is Trevor Roland, and I've been working in the head for the last maybe 6-7 months now as the digital and e-learning officer. So I've got a background in assistive technology. So I worked as an assistive technology officer for a number of years in higher education. And so from that, I have lots of rich experiences about matching assistive technologies to the needs of different students with disabilities. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about context of assistive technology. I'm going to talk then a little bit about a case study, a fictional case study about someone in the workplace called Johnny. And then I'm going to give a summary of the 10 tips about assistive technology, and then just a little bit of information about an AT resource that we're making here in AHEAD, and that'll be available in about mid-September-ish. So we'll keep you updated about that. And so of course, we love definitions, and we've seen Siobhan providing a number of definitions. So all I'm doing is echoing a definition she stated herself in the presentation. And that's any item, piece of equipment, or product, system, whether acquired commercially, as there's loads of commercial AT products online now. And I'll be giving information about suppliers who can supply more information about that. Modified technologies are customized that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. So that comes from the World Health Organization. So I suppose the reason why I was putting that in is to kind of emphasize that this assistive technology drive isn't something that's existing in just Ireland or Europe. Like, it's a global movement that's happening, and it's about supporting these kind of people from all types of walks of life so they can participate equally in society, in all facets of society. So in terms of who uses AT, well, it's all types of people. Assistive technology helps people with not only with difficulties speaking or typing or writing, also remembering, physically with aspects such as pointing or even seeing and hearing, learning, walking, loads of different types of challenges. So AT itself then is a really powerful tool because it kind of enables participation when there's a disability. And then in terms of different disabilities, there may be even like combinations of disabilities. And then these combinations of disabilities then lead to also combinations of assistive technology. So in terms of like AT on its own, is incredibly powerful, but then for someone with more kind of challenging difficulties, then the power is magnified by combining different ATs to enable that person. So even currently, we're seeing AT not only just in education or in all facets of education, all the way from primary, secondary, and even higher education, but from the workplace too. And I think that's an incredibly important point about that continuum of assistive technology happening at kind of the level of even primary school or even before that. You know, so that person who may have a disability can use that AT throughout their whole life, and then kind of, you know, hopefully with the support of workplaces and managers, when these people with disabilities who use AT work in the workplace, that's, you know, that those people within the workplace can also acknowledge that type of support that that graduate or that employee needs as well. So in terms of its purpose, well, I really like this quote because it talks about AT, about enabling people to live healthy, productive, and independent, dignified lives. And that dignified bit I really like, because it's really talking about their well-being and to participate not only in education, but within the labour market. So specific to this presentation as well. And also just in terms of their civic life. Like, so in other words, all aspects and facets of their life. And just echoing again what Siobhan would have said, like that number 15% globally, of people with disabilities. Like when you think of 1 billion people around, and then in terms of that 1 billion, or that 50%, like 10%, hopefully are getting AT, but still that number could be higher, and there's also that need for AT. So here we come to fictional case study about Johnny. So I really like the idea of just like sharing Johnny's story with you. So he just completed a degree and he's very enthusiastic, not only about marketing, but to get a job within that field that he studies. So he's highly sociable, loves working in groups, and he's very tech savvy. So he has dyslexia, which is very uncommon. So about 1 in 10 people have dyslexia. So chances are we all know someone with dyslexia, and but disclosed it to few, even though he's had supports in secondary school and university. So and this is kind of based a bit on a few different kind of stories of people who I know that, you know, that continuum exists of support between secondary school and university, and then supports that transition. And like that, when AT helps the students then from university to the workplace, that aids the transition as well. So he uses AT, but can get frustrated with his writing skills. So particularly in this new role that he sought, and there's report writing, and that he finds quite challenging at times. So in terms of his AT history, the university had provided him with a piece of paid AT software called Text-Help Read and Write Goals. So this is a really well-known piece of software that can be installed onto like a desktop or a laptop and is widely used across the world. So this helps him with many of the challenges that his dyslexia proposes for him. So particularly when it comes to the university life that he had, it helped him with reading. So reads out websites and reports and Word documents. And he liked this tool because in terms of listening to those documents, he would also read them to himself as the software would listen, as he would listen to the read out information. And then he found that this in particular then helped him retain that information. So by listening and reading to the information, he was kind of getting a multisensory kind of effect happening, and that helped compound information in his mind. In terms of writing skills, that Text-Help Read and Write Goals has spelling and grammar supports as well. So for the typical university challenges such as essay writing, he found that useful. And then in particular, there's a really great tool that converts Word documents into MP3s. So Johnny would have used this throughout, as he would have made audio files out of his Word documents. So it could be something that his lecturer asked him to read, or something that he would have had to read himself, maybe even proofreading his own essays. So he would have converted these into MP3s, put that MP3 on his phone, and then put in his headphones. And as he's going to and fro, he is listening to these as he's going. So now he's in a new work situation. So he's got to ask for assistive technology. So this will be the first time, not only is he in a workplace, professional workplace, but he's got to also think about how he's going to acquire assistive technology. So because it's COVID times, he's been given a work laptop. So his work laptop doesn't come automatically with Text-Help Read and Write Goals. So a few questions are kind of popping into his mind about, like, is there a disability disclosure policy? Because he'd probably feel a little bit more confident approaching staff if there was such a thing, maybe in the website itself, or maybe there's an intranet in the workplace. And that would kind of give him that impetus then to kind of go and then talk to someone. Also, would there be a disability liaison officer in the workplace as well? And again, this person, if the company or organization has one, would be a great means of then helping Johnny kind of participate in that conversation about his disability and about those kind of assistive technologies that he would need for the workplace. Then Johnny himself, he's a bit nervous talking about his disability, but he's got a manager called Tess. Tess is great. We love Tess. So he's a bit worried that Tess will think a few things, like, will his manager think less of him for having a disability? Now, fortunately, Tess is really open. She doesn't understand the disability or how to support him much, but she's going to have the conversation. So, and the bottom line is, which he's worried about, is he just going to get the assistive technology? Because he's quite invested in assistive technology, particularly Text-Help, as he's got a history of it, he's used it, he knows it can adapt to his lifestyle, and he's quite confident and proficient with it and can see possibilities of using it in the workplace. So then, so he's had the conversation with his manager. So possible thoughts that his manager would have had. So Tess is unaware of AT, But coincidentally, her eldest son has just been diagnosed with dyslexia. So actually, she's just started a little voyage of discovery about dyslexia too. So sometimes that can actually happen in real life, that genuinely people, you don't know what their backgrounds are, but because of dyslexia is so kind of widespread that chances are there's someone in that person's life who does know about dyslexia. So maybe this is the first time she's discovering about AT. And, you know, so she's maybe a little bit even invested in supporting Johnny then about AT because she can see that maybe it would help her eldest son. So she's thinking a few things about, is AT widely known? Is it something that, you know, it's just a niche thing that no one has heard about before? So she wants kind of a few questions about that. So will AT really help her staff? Like, she doesn't know. So is it just going to be another cost of something that may or may not be used? She's unsure of. So will the AT be expensive? So that's something she'll look into, and hopefully she'll find some information about a workplace adaptation grant, and that will help alleviate any cost concerns that she has. Also, has another staff member in the organization used AT. So if there is, chances are a license for that same piece of assistive technology that may be offered to Johnny may already exist. So then the question is, so is there someone within the organization who kind of tracks that, or is there some common area where people can go and check this information before they go through the procurement process for a new piece of assistive technology? And like what was mentioned before, so will the IT systems allow the AT to be used? So for example, Grammarly was mentioned already, and sometimes there can be firewall issues with that. So if these can't be negotiated, will there be alternatives? So anyway, that might be a possible obstacle in the future. So Tess is fantastic. So Tess goes out of her way to help Johnny. So out of that, she finds someone to do an AT assessment to support Johnny. So in this case, we've got someone who's very nice, Janet. She's an AT expert. Now, Janet is a bit of a kind of like really invested in AT because she uses herself. So Janet loves this quote. So it is necessary to adopt socio-technological view of the entire process. So this entire AT matching process that Siobhan would have mentioned earlier. So this view brings together the essential elements of the AT assessment process. The person, first of all, because the person himself or herself is pivotal to the whole matching process. The technology, second, because it should be the person first. And then the environment. So that environment, or in this place, the work environment. So does Johnny work in an open office? If so, if the AT will be reading out loud, the way he might have to address this is just simply plug in his earphones, so then everyone else in the office won't hear that noise being made. But anyway, in this case, COVID has happened, so he's working at home, so he doesn't need to plug in his earphones. So text help can read out the text to him, and he can listen away to that information. So Siobhan would have mentioned one type of matching AT to the person approach, which is matching person to and technology, the MPT assessment type. So I really like this one because it's about the person-centered approach to technology and how it determines the best fit to the software device, and also not only just the environment, but that person's daily routine. So like what we saw with Johnny, he had a daily routine as well of creating those MP3s and putting them on his phone and listening to information like Word documents and such, his capabilities. So he was able to convert those into MP3s as well and transfer them to his phone. Also his self-identity. So we can see from the story that Johnny, even though he's had supports for a long time, he's still not completely confident about disclosing his disability. So hopefully in a supportive work environment, that might change. He might be more open about sharing not only how he uses technology, but maybe even encouraging other people in the workplace with disabilities to open up as well about their disabilities. So and there's lots of other ways that this MPT approach kind of considers the person. So it's quite holistic in the way it thinks of the human being, which I particularly like because it should be a person-centered approach. So anyway, back to Johnny. So from the assessment, Janet, the AT expert, recommends text help because he has dyslexia. And on top of that, she also recommends a second piece of AT software, a well-known piece of equipment called Dragon software. So due to his typing speed. So Johnny ends up finding out that he has something called dyspraxia, and that's why he types a little bit slow, and that's actually been one of the issues why he not only struggles to get his reports done quickly, but also this has been apparent for the last few years, but just has been unidentified until now. So Dragon then will allow him to speak. So through speaking, the software will then allow text to be generated in a Word document. So in terms of typing his document now, he can just type with his voice. So that might be a quicker way for Johnny then to get his reports done in work. So Johnny, anyway, thankfully, will be getting Dragon. So while he's waiting, you know, Janet can recommend a number of free technologies that are available. So I call these kind of assistive technology stepping stones. So while he's waiting, Janet asks him if he's got Office 365 in the workplace or if he has Gmail. If he's got either, so in Office 365, that means he would have access to Word. And then within Word, there's a tool called Dictate, and it's really easy to find in the toolbar. And that means if he just clicks on that Dictate button, he can just speak out loud, and that Dictate tool then will allow him to write up his Word documents with his voice, and it's pretty good. And in Gmail, there's an equivalent kind of tool. So in Google Docs, which you find in your Gmail account, there's another tool, but it's called a slightly different name. It's called voice typing, and voice typing then allows him to type with his voice. So again, it's quite good, and I've used both of them. And then if he has an iPad or an iPhone or supplied with one in work, again, that has a free kind of speech to text tool where he can type with his voice. So then finally, he's kind of tried it, he's built up a bit of confidence about speaking out loud, using punctuation. So this is a report, full stop, new line. So there's certain kind of voice commands he's getting into the habit of using. So then Dragon, when he gets it, then he's kind of broken in a little bit about how to use this kind of speech to text kind of tool. And the Dragon does a lot more. It's quite a sophisticated software. So it will help in many ways. And then why I like this next quote is because it also complements something Siobhan said earlier. It was generally acknowledged that assistive technology and mainstream technologies are converging. So in addition, applications originally developed as AT, such as speech recognition, so like Dragon that we were mentioning, that converts your voice into text, has crossed over into mainstream. So what we mean by that is now Office 365 has Dictate, Gmail has voice typing. So these mainstream technologies now have what were considered assistive technologies in the past. So while mainstream technologies are being used as AT. So, and that's quite a recent report in education. So it's great to see this acknowledgement of this mainstreaming of technologies, this convergence of AT, not only for people with disabilities, but widely accessible to everyone. So AT barriers and AT abandonment. So here we go, stigma. So the concept of stigma is relevant to technology use in the context of technologies designed to address disability. So I love the example of Anya, where she just had such a positive example of like AT in the workplace, disclosing her disability, people being supportive, and that. So for Johnny, I think maybe the stigma could be maybe just internally. So hopefully an open and supportive environment will help that. So, and I really love this quote. So when the environment is unsupportive, negative perceptions and experiences can be such that the potential usefulness of AT is uncoupled. So basically your work environment can affect quite dramatically how you use or whether you're going to use your AT at all. And then this becomes uncoupled from their perceived value. So in other words, that usefulness and that kind of personal and professional value of AT then is kind of just broken down. And a possible means to address this could be disability awareness training. And then that, in terms of bringing disability awareness training into the workplace, could maybe take away those kind of fears or those unknowns about what disability is in the workplace. So that could be a possible solution. And then as AT is frequently abandoned, unfortunately, are not used, the reasons are often multifactorial. So it could be an internal thing, it could be external, like as in an unsupportive work environment, or internal as in that person's just self-identity about having a disability. It may just be unfortunately negative, but changeable. And these can include difficulties in incorporating assistive technologies in identity and self-image. So again, I've put loads of links throughout this. So for those people who are going to get the presentation afterwards, I've tried to make sure that all these sources that I've used, I've put available, just so you can read about assistive technology yourself. And then, because I just think this point about AT abandonment and all these AT barriers is incredibly important. So I think if you're an employer, it's kind of good to know like the power of the workplace in terms of supporting people with disabilities, and not only in that, but the power of the workplace in terms of supporting staff and their use of AT, and kind of getting that buy-in and dispelling that stigma there. So AT suppliers. So then if you do get someone coming in and they're matching the technology and the workplace is great and supportive and the AT is funded, then where do you go to buy it? So there's two places who we're just going to mention here because they're Ireland based. So Sight and Sound, and I've left the contact details there. And then Chime, specific for deaf and hard of hearing people, I've left their contact details there. So if you do have queries then about kind of assistive technology and how to purchase them, they would be really useful to you. So to synopsize the presentation into 10 assistive technology tips, I would say the top one would be, like, as a staff member or a manager, like, be informed about not only disability but AT, and hopefully this presentation with the links as well as Siobhan's and Anya's talk will help you with that. Second one would be consider having a disability policy disclosure if you don't already have one. So there's lots of them around, other organizations have them, so there might be the ability to kind of see others and maybe kind of take bits and pieces that kind of will help your own kind of organization, you know, support people with disabilities to just come forth and disclose it. And then even having a disability liaison officer as well. So I think we even have one here today. I think Niall is here. And I think it's great to have that, because then if it's a person who is that disability liaison officer who can engage in that conversation with a staff member who's about to disclose, I think that makes it even more personal and even more powerful. So the third tip would be matching AT to the need, as technology, which I think enables inclusion, that sense of belonging and well-being. I think there's a report I've included and a link to, and that's, I think Ger Craddock was involved in that report. I think it was with the NCSE, and that actually evaluates assistive technology in terms of the well-being of the individual. And I think it's quite a powerful way of looking at AT and evaluating it in terms of how it positively affects the well-being of an individual. And then the fourth point I would make would be challenge AT assumptions. And what Siobhan said earlier about, like, AT costs, that I think when you think about specialized assistive technology, people's mind automatically goes into this will cost just an awful lot of money, and why should I invest in it? When ordinarily we see not only from Siobhan Long in Enable Ireland, but also from the WAM team here who have done a study showing that normally those AT costs are quite low. You know, and then that staff member then can feel included and, you know, participate equally in their work duties, and then with some tools that are just cheap and easy to bring in. So the fifth point would be that AT procurement. So can AT help more than just one staff member? So the point I was brought up about, maybe there's already an existing license for that piece of assistive technology, and if so, is that easy to find out in your organization? And if you have those AT licenses, then and you get a number of people with the same disability, then that actually, you've done the hard bit, which is the procurement bit, and then you just have the bit about, like, disseminating that AT to the person. So the sixth tip is about free technology can be a stepping stone to exploring technology and lead to successful paid assistive technologies. So I definitely think that even with the free tools there, which are fantastic and amazing, that the aim should always be about providing the best possible piece of assistive technology to the individual. then the 7th point, which is disability awareness training. So that, again, I think is a great way to kind of initiate those conversations about disability in the workplace, and even to help people kind of question themselves and how they think about disabilities themselves, and even maybe someone with a disability to even just come out and disclose their disability and, you know, start that conversation about how to be supported in the workplace, which I think is just incredibly powerful to do. 8, breaking down those barriers, again, kind of all melding into one, which is like that disability awareness training can help break down those barriers, those attitudinal barriers. Also, just looking at like IT barriers as well. There could be ways of kind of disassembling those types of barriers. But in other words, the aim is to like remove that disability stigma that can unfortunately exist. And then point number 9, to get feedback from your staff when they do use AT. So, you know, can you go back to that person and actually ask them, so how is the tool? Actually learn about the AT from the person as well. Like, how does it help in all these different ways? I think that's really good. And actually, if, like, for me, I think people might be really approachable about that to help their managers figure out why and how assistive technology is helping them in the workplace. And then this kind of goes back to point 1 about just being informed and open. And if you are open, then all these other things start flowing as well and becoming possible within the workplace. And then the final point, which is point 10, that these people then who are confident and supported in the workplace about their disabilities could actually become disability champions and actually become part of like celebrating diversity in the workplace, and then just ultimately create this sense of well-being and belonging, and just everyone just working more effectively. And I like to think like AHEAD is part of that kind of solution for that kind of process, especially the WAM service here, who do fantastic work, and the WAM team are particularly like amazing and like incredibly dedicated about supporting like people with disabilities behind the scenes. And then finally, we are developing an AT resource called AT Hive. So that will be available around mid-September. So we'll be keeping people updated about that. And that's literally going to be, you know, a means of communicating with people about this range of assistive technologies, all the way from free to paid AT tools. So that is our way of kind of trying to address this kind of communication gap about AT. So people who are either managers or students or so on can learn about AT from this resource. So we're really excited about that tool, and I think it's much needed. That'll be great. So I just want to say thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, trevor.bowens@ahead.ie, or tweet me, and I'm happy to talk any further, but thanks a lot. So I think I'm back to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Trevor. That was just wonderful. Niall O'Hanlon from ESB says you're a wonderful storyteller. And certainly I was very invested in Johnny's journey. I won't ask any questions. I'm just going to wrap it up now because we are a few minutes over time. But I think I just want to end on the point you were making about it being person-centered. And I think that story of Johnny, you know, highlighted that very much, you know, Johnny's capabilities, his self-identity. I thought that was a great point. What does he need? His past experiences. So I think, you know, that's a good note to end on. Just remember, AT should be that person-centered approach. Just think of Johnny.
We all know a Johnny, yes.
We all know a Johnny, exactly. So thank you so much, Trevor. That was just wonderful. So I'm just going to end by just sharing my screen here with you now, just for one moment. So I don't know if you can see that now. So I just want to share with you, on the 15th of September, we have our next webinar. So that will be on remote onboarding. So you can follow the link www.ahead.ie/webinars to register for that. That's set to be a very exciting webinar. And so to conclude, I'm just going to ask Niamh to share a poll, which just asking about, you know, what have you benefited from this webinar? Yes, no, somewhat, still unsure. So if you could answer that. So I've just ended the polling there. It's a 100% yes. So thank you very much for answering that, and thank you to all of you who stayed to the end. We had 120. That was the most I saw during the webinar, so thank you very much. It's great that 100% of you felt that you benefited, and have a lovely lunch. Goodbye.